The day my mother-in-law threw a cup of cold coffee at my face because I'd made it wrong, I smiled, wiped my cheek with a dish towel, and went back to finishing the dishes. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word. I'd learned by then that words only made things worse. That was 9 years into my marriage. 9 years of learning when to be invisible. When I first met my husband, I thought I'd found something rare. He was charming in that quiet way. Not showy, not loud. He remembered small things. He asked about my mother's health on our second date. He held doors open and genuinely seemed to mean it. I was 31, working as a registered nurse at a hospital in Mississauga, and I'd been so focused on my career through my 20s that I'd missed what most of my friends had already moved through. The bad relationships, the lessons, the slow building of instincts. I had none of that. I walked into his family's world completely unprepared. We got married 18 months after we met. Small wedding, backyard ceremony at his parents' house in Oakville. It was beautiful. I remember standing there in the late August light thinking, this is it. This is the thing people mean when they talk about being happy. His mother stood beside him most of the day. I told myself that was normal, that it was just how their family was. Close-knit, warm. Those were the words I used. By our first anniversary, I understood that those words had been completely wrong. My mother-in-law didn't move in with us right away. That came later. First, it was the constant visits. She had a key to our condo. My husband had given it to her before we were married, and never asked for it back, never thought to. She would let herself in on Saturday mornings, while we were still in bed. She'd start rearranging things in the kitchen, opening cupboards, commenting about my organization system, the food I'd bought, whether the floors looked clean enough. My husband would come downstairs, see her there and smile. "Mum, you didn't have to come all the way over," he'd say, and she'd wave him off and start making eggs, and it would be like I wasn't in the room at all. I told myself it was a cultural thing. I told myself it was just love, expressed in a different language than what I'd grown up with. My own family was loose and warm in that chaotic way. My mother would have laughed if I called her a homemaker. She was a secondary school teacher and never once suggested I'd done my dishes wrong. But I thought maybe I was just adjusting. Maybe the friction was mine to manage. My sister-in-law was the other presence in my marriage. She was 2 years younger than my husband, unmarried, and had moved back home after finishing a graduate degree she'd never used. She didn't work. She spent her days driving between her parents' house and ours, sometimes arriving before noon with a bag of groceries she'd bought on my husband's credit card, groceries she would cook into meals for him that didn't include me. Not obviously. She'd just make portions for two, herself and her brother, and I would quietly pull something together from whatever was left in the fridge while she sat at our kitchen table and talked to him about his day. I want to be clear about something, because I've been asked this before, and I know it's the question that sits in people's minds: why didn't you leave? It's a fair question. Looking back, I ask it too, but when you're inside it, when you've been slowly turned down like a volume dial over years, you stop being able to hear your own voice clearly. Each individual thing felt so small. A cup of coffee thrown, well, she's stressed. A dinner not made for me, well, I was working late. A decision made without me, well, it's just how this family operates. None of it felt like a crisis on its own. And when you spend enough time explaining away the small things, you don't notice the weight you're carrying until it's already too much to lift. I was the one paying most of the bills. My husband worked in sales for a construction supply company, and his income was unpredictable. Mine wasn't. As a nurse, I had a stable salary, shift differentials, benefits. I covered our mortgage, groceries, utilities. He contributed when things were good and apologized when they weren't. I accepted both and kept going. About 4 years in, his mother moved into the spare room. She had a fall. A genuine one. She slipped on ice outside her house in February and fractured her wrist. She needed support for a few months. I agreed to that, genuinely. I'm a nurse. I understand recovery. I rearranged my schedule to accommodate her medical appointments. I drove her. I helped her bathe for the first 2 weeks. She never left. By the 6-year mark, she had claimed the spare room so completely that she'd brought over furniture from her house. My sister-in-law came over most days. My husband would come home from work and go straight to his mother's room to talk to her before he even put down his jacket. Our bedroom had become just a place where I slept, sometimes alone when he stayed up late watching television with his family in the living room. I kept working. Night shifts, sometimes doubles, because the money was needed and also because, honestly, the hospital was the only place where I felt like myself. Where my decisions mattered, where someone listened when I spoke. My colleagues knew my name. My patients thanked me. I would drive home at 6 in the morning sometimes, sitting in the parking lot of our building for 20 minutes before I could make myself go upstairs. The financial piece became impossible to ignore around year 7. I sat down one evening with our bank statements and went through them methodically, the way I do when I'm charting for a patient. No emotion, just data. What I found was that my husband had been using our joint account to cover his family's expenses, not ours. His mother's prescriptions, his sister's car repairs, a weekend trip to Banff that I hadn't been invited on. Small amounts regularly, larger ones occasionally. Over 3 years, I calculated that nearly $30,000 had moved from our account toward his family, and almost none of it had come from him. I didn't confront him that night. I'd learned what happened when I raised concerns about money. He'd get quiet, then cold. Then his mother would somehow know about it the next morning, and I'd spend the day being managed by the two of them. Comments about gratitude, about family loyalty, about how different my Western approach was from how a family was supposed to function. The irony wasn't lost on me. We live in Mississauga. I was born in Guelph. He was born in Brampton. But somehow, when I expressed an opinion about our finances, I was the outsider. I started doing something that year that I've never told anyone until now. I opened a separate account at a different bank. Not to hide money exactly, more to protect what was mine. I started having a portion of my direct deposit go there. Not enough to be immediately obvious. Just a small redirect every 2 weeks. I wasn't planning anything specific yet, it was more like an instinct. A quiet survival response. The summer of last year was when things shifted into something I couldn't manage quietly anymore. My sister-in-law had decided at 34 years old that she wanted to go back to school, interior design. She'd found a program at a college in Toronto. She would need tuition, she would need a laptop, she would need, apparently, for my husband to co-sign a line of credit for her. And she would need to move into our second bedroom permanently, not his mother's room, our actual office, while she completed the 2-year program. I found out about all of this at dinner one night. Not as a conversation, as an announcement. We talked to the bank today, my husband said, cutting into his food. The application went through. I put down my fork. What application? He looked up. His mother was watching me from across the table. For your sister's school, he said. We covered the first semester. I was very still for a moment. When were you going to tell me? I'm telling you now. His mother said something then about how family supports each other. How this was what you do. How she'd done the same for my husband when he was young. My sister-in-law smiled at her food. My husband went back to eating. I excused myself from the table and went to the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the tub and breathed slowly for a minute. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The same technique I use with anxious patients. I decided, then. Not dramatically, not in a flood of emotion. Just a quiet, clear decision, the way you make a clinical call when you've gathered enough information. I am going to leave. I didn't tell anyone. Over the next 4 months, I did what needed to be done. I made an appointment with a family law lawyer in Brampton. A woman my colleague had used during her divorce and spoken highly of. We met on a Tuesday afternoon while I claimed I had a dentist appointment. She was direct and thorough. She told me what I was entitled to, what the process looked like, what I needed to document. I started documenting. I contacted a financial advisor and began understanding what our shared assets actually looked like. Our condo was in both names. It had appreciated significantly since we'd bought it. We'd purchased in 2018 and the market, even with its corrections, had been good to us. My lawyer confirmed that with my earnings history, my contribution to the mortgage, and the documentation I was building, I had a strong position. I began, carefully, to speak to a realtor, a woman I found through a friend of a friend, someone with no connection to my husband's circle. We met at a coffee shop near the hospital. I told her I was planning a sale. She told me what the unit would likely list for. I thanked her and left. All of this I kept completely to myself. I worked my shifts. I made dinners. I watched television with my husband on Friday nights. I drove his mother to her rheumatologist in January. I did all of it without expression, which was easier than it should have been, because I'd had years of practice keeping my face calm when I was screaming inside. The thing that broke the silence wasn't anything I chose. It was a Tuesday in March. I had worked a night shift and come home at 7 in the morning. The condo was quiet. My husband was already at work, his mother still asleep, his sister not yet arrived. I went to the kitchen to make coffee. There were dishes left from the night before, not mine, piled in the sink. I started washing them out of habit. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. My mother-in-law was standing in the kitchen doorway, wearing her housecoat, looking at me with an expression I can only describe as contempt. She'd worn that expression before, many times. But something about that morning, the exhaustion from the overnight shift, the months of carrying my plan alone, the particular quality of the silence, it felt different. You were loud coming in, she said. I hadn't been. I'd taken off my shoes at the door. I'd moved through the entryway in my socks. I'd set my keys down silently on the hook. I knew how to be invisible in that apartment. I'd been practicing it for years. I'm sorry, I said anyway. The automatic response. She walked toward the my coffee maker that I'd bought before the marriage, and began making herself a cup without offering to make one for me. She had never once made me coffee in 9 years. You should think, she said, not looking at me, watching the coffee brew, about whether this family is still working for you. I looked at her. What do you mean? My son is not happy, she said. I think you know this. She turned and looked at me then. Maybe it's time to think about what's next. I didn't respond. I picked up my bag, walked to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and called my lawyer from inside the closet with the door closed. I'd like to move things forward, I said when she answered. How quickly? She asked. As fast as we can responsibly do this, I said. By the following week, the condo was listed. My realtor moved efficiently and professionally, and the listing went live on a Thursday. By Sunday, we had 3 offers. We accepted the highest. Conditional on financing, closing in 60 days. My husband found out when he received a notification from our joint account. My realtor had required a small administrative payment that I'd processed. He called me at the hospital mid-shift. I let it go to voicemail. His voice on the message was confused, not angry yet. Hey, can you call me back? There's something weird on the bank account. By the time I called him back, I was in my car in the hospital parking lot. My lawyer had advised me on what to say and what not to say. I kept it simple. I've listed the condo, I said. We have an accepted offer. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Silence, then what are you talking about? I've filed for divorce, I said. My lawyer will be in contact. More silence. Where is this coming from? He said. His voice had shifted. I recognized the tone, the beginning of management, the move toward control. We can talk about this. Whatever's upset you, we can. I'm not upset, I said. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I'm okay. I'll talk to you through our lawyers from here. I hung up. That evening, I wasn't at home. I'd arranged to stay with a friend from work, a woman I've known for 7 years, who knew more than I'd told her and less than I'd needed her to. She gave me her guest room and didn't ask questions. I sat on the bed that night and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, more like the moment after you put down something extremely heavy. A kind of physical relief, a stillness. My husband called twice from her cell. My sister-in-law, who had never once called me in 9 years, called once. I answered none of them. My lawyer filed the divorce application that week. Given the financial documentation I'd been building for 8 months, she moved with confidence. The asset division negotiation began. My husband retained a lawyer. His first counter-proposal was almost insulting in its assumptions. It suggested that the proceeds of the condo sale should be split 60-40 in his favor, on the basis of something his lawyer described vaguely as family contributions and support provided to the household. When my lawyer explained what that phrase was referencing, I actually laughed out loud in her office. He was arguing that his family living in my home, eating my groceries, spending my money, entitled him to a larger share of the home I'd paid the mortgage on. The negotiation was not long. My documentation was meticulous. Bank statements, email records, transfer histories, pay stubs. I had been systematic. I had been thorough. I had been apparently a very good nurse, organized, evidence-based, unafraid of the paperwork. The settlement came through on a Wednesday morning in May. I was sitting in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons in Brampton when my lawyer called me with the final numbers. I didn't cry. I ordered a medium coffee through the drive-thru and sat in the sunshine with the windows down and felt the specific quiet that comes after a very long noise finally stops. The condo sold for substantially more than we'd paid. After the mortgage was cleared and the legal fees settled, my portion was enough to be a genuine foundation. Not a windfall, not a fantasy, but real options money. The kind of money that means you can make choices rather than just absorb whatever happens to you. I'd been looking at a position at a hospital in Halifax. The job listing had come across my feed back in January during one of my closet phone sessions, and I'd noted it quietly. I applied in March. I interviewed in April via video call from my friend's kitchen table while she was at work. In May, when the settlement finalized, I had an offer letter sitting in my email. I gave my notice at the hospital in Mississauga. On the same day, I accepted the position in Halifax. My colleagues threw me a small going-away thing in the break room. One of the older nurses, a woman I'd worked alongside for 6 years, hugged me and said, "I always knew you were going to do something like this." I wasn't entirely sure what she meant. I chose to take it as a compliment. I drove to Halifax. I wanted to drive it. I loaded what I owned, which was less than I'd once thought, and more than enough, into a rental van and drove across the country on a route that took 4 days and went through Quebec and New Brunswick, and through landscape that made me pull over twice just to look at it. I'd lived in Ontario my entire life. I hadn't known how big everything else was. My new apartment is on the third floor of a building in the North End. 2 bedrooms, one for sleeping, one that I'm currently using as a study, where I have a bookshelf and a plant and a desk that faces a window. It's quiet here in a way that feels chosen rather than imposed. Nobody has a key to this apartment but me. I've been in Halifax for 6 weeks now. I work 3 12-hour shifts per week. I walk along the waterfront on my days off. I've been to the farmer's market twice and the art gallery once. I'm not lonely exactly. Loneliness requires expecting company that doesn't come. I've been alone in rooms for years while surrounded by people. This is different. This is just me, in a quiet apartment, slowly remembering what I actually like. I got a message from my husband 3 weeks ago, not from his lawyer. From him directly, through a text to my personal number. He'd apparently had time to think. He said he missed me. He said things had been hard since everything happened. He said his mother wasn't doing well. I read it twice. I sat with it for a moment. Then I set the phone face down on the table and went to make dinner. Something I wanted from a recipe I'd been meaning to try. I turned on the radio, a jazz station out of Dartmouth that I'd found by accident and come to like, and cooked while the evening light came through the kitchen window. I didn't reply. I've thought about what I would tell the version of myself who stood at that backyard wedding in Oakville, so certain she was stepping into something good. I don't think I'd tell her not to do it. I'm not sure that would help. I think I'd just stand next to her for a minute and say, "You will know when it's enough." Trust that knowing. And when it comes, don't wait a single day longer than you already have. Because the truth is, the clearest thing I understand now, on the other side of all of it, is that the day I finally chose myself wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't a scene. It was just a quiet, ordinary morning in a kitchen I'd paid for, being told by a woman who had never once been grateful for anything I'd given her that maybe this family wasn't working for me anymore. She was right. It wasn't. And that morning, for the first time in 9 years, I agreed with her.